All right, guys, we are now in Lecture 2 of Music 154, Form Analysis with Professor Bierson. Let's get into it. Lecture 2, The Sentence. All right, I'd like to start off today's lecture by reviewing what we did, our analysis of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is a classic American pop song. We looked at it for the 32-bar form, and we identified the large sections, A, B, A. And then within those sections, we identified the phrases and the ideas, phrases being the blue slurs, and the ideas being the two-measure yellow brackets. And then we looked at the motives, which we called X and Y and Z. Okay, the motives are what make up the musical ideas. So the thing that I want to get into today with this very rich piece is just looking at the first A section. This is a particular construction, a formal construction that makes up this phrase. And I mentioned it a little bit in the last class, but here we have our two-measure idea, and then another two-measure idea based off of the same X motive. And then we have this, which I didn't label. I didn't label this part anything. And that's because it's called a continuation. And a continuation after two-measure ideas is a structure that we call a sentence. This is a musical sentence. So the continuation part begins based off of the same motive X and same motive Y, but it sort of mixes them up, right? Breaks them down a little bit, and then has this continuous motion all the way till the cadence happens. So we don't really call this an idea, we call this a fragmentation of an idea, or the liquidation of an idea. And it takes us in a very exciting way to get to the end of the phrase for the cadence. All right, so this is a sentence, and this will be the topic for today's lesson. Let's get into some definitions. The sentence is a theme type that comprises a musical section, usually the A section, so it's the beginning of a piece. And its standard form is 8 measures long. You could see sentences that are proportional, so a 4-measure sentence or a 16-measure sentence, but the basic form is 8 measures. There can also be extensions or variations, so you might have 10-measure sentence or 7-measure sentence, but again, the basic model is 8 measures. The first half is what we call the presentation phase. Now, some people will call this a presentation phrase, but I prefer the word phase, and I like to keep the word phrase for a musical idea that is completed by a cadence. And so there's no cadence in this presentation, so I call it a presentation phase. It has a 2-measure basic idea plus a 2-measure basic idea, usually based off of the same motive. And that total makes for 4 measures. Okay, so it's a basic idea twice. The second time, however, it might have a different harmony, and the motives that are used might be slightly varied. After we have the presentation phase, we have the continuation phase. And this one is where you get normally a 1 + 1 + 2 grouping. And the 1 + 1 part is it takes a motive from the basic idea in the presentation phase and fragments it. So we call that the fragmentation. And then the +2 of this is what we call the liquidation. It liquidates the motives into more generic rhythmic values. So no longer will the motives be recognizable from the basic idea in the presentation phase. They'll be maybe like a scale, or maybe a couple of quarter notes or some eighth notes leading into the cadence. Okay, so this particular structure is also 4 measures, and together the presentation phase plus the continuation phase makes for a sentence. And I've said that the continuation phase is based on motives from the basic idea in the beginning, but it develops them in a dynamic way. So the sentence, even though it's a small unit of form, it's a very exciting one. All right, now I want to take a listen to a piece of music that is based on a sentence. And let's see if you can try and listen for the structure that I've just defined.
You shake my nerves and you rattle my brain. Too much love drives a man insane. You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness, this wreck is just quitting balls of fire. I let the love all I thought it was funny. You came along and you moved now, honey. I changed my mind, looking fine. Goodness gracious, quitting balls of fire. Should. You're fine, so kind. I'm under this world that you're mine. I took my nerves and I twiddle my spine. I'm real nervous, but it sure is fun. Come on, baby, it drives me crazy. The goodness gracious, quit balls of fire.
Okay, that was Great Balls of Fire. And here I have a reduced score to look at. Couple of points about this score. This is a rock/blues song. So I don't have Roman numerals at the bottom. Instead, I have chord chart symbols on the top. Okay. The other thing is that since this is a blues, even though this is in C major, you see the key signature is no sharps or flats. Even though this is in C major, the one chord is based off of an E flat that the singer sings. That's what we call the blue note. Okay, you have, even though it's a major tonality overall, the singer will sing that minor third above it. That's called the blue note. And then the other thing is, at the end, I've labeled a PAC. Now, there is no PAC in the traditional classical sense. So, in a way, the material that you've learned in the first 4 semesters of theory is very culturally contextual. It really only deals with a couple of hundred years of European classical music. Now, when we get to things like blues or American pop music or other world musics, there's different cadential formulas. I'm going to still use the term PAC, however, in this case, because the melody ends on the tonic, do. But if you'll pay attention to the harmony, there is no 5-1 cadence at that point. Instead, what we get is a blues progression of 5-7 to 4-7 to 1 for the last 2 bars. So those 2 caveats aside, this is a really awesome, very sophisticated, believe it or not, musical sentence. Now let's break it down. This is the A section of the song. That's why I've labeled A at the top of the slide here. And normally I would put a blues slur over the entire passage, but since I had to fit it all on one slide, I'm just putting ... for that. Imagine the blues slur going over the whole thing until the PAC, all the way till here, okay? Now, underneath that, okay, we've got our phrase marked off. Inside of the phrase, remember, we have ideas. So the first 2 measure idea is right there, first 2 bars. And the second idea is the next 2 bars. Okay, so we've already got the sentence structure unfolding. We got 2 bars of something and then 2 bars of the same sort of thing. To understand a little better the relationship, however, let's look at the motives. I've got that first repeated note, okay, on the 8th notes and the quarter note as my motive X. And then I've got that dip down from C to A, back to C, and then up to E flat. I've got that as my Y motive. Okay, so my first two-measure idea is based on two motives, X and Y. Let's take a look at the second two-measure idea. I've got X prime now because we've still got the same repeated note, and it's in fact the same pitch, E flat. However, the rhythm is slightly varied, so we've got now a quarter note instead of these 2/8 notes here. So it gives it a little sense of variation, although it's still identifiably the same motive. And again, this is a sign of very sophisticated melody writing. Okay, this is a sentence structure. The next thing I got here is Y prime. And I say Y prime because you've got the same beginning, right? A leap down of a third from C to A and then back up to C. So we've got the same melodic intervallic contour and the same rhythms, except now we've got a quarter note and then the C leaps down to F instead of up to E flat as before. So this is still the Y motive, but it's varied. So we have X prime and Y prime for this. The other thing you'll notice is that in the second presentation of the idea, we have an F7 chord instead of a C chord. Okay, so the harmony changed and the motives are varied, but it's still the same idea. Okay, presented two measures in the first part, and then presented two more measures in the second part. All right, let's take a look at what's next. Second system. Here we have 1 and then 1. Okay, this is motive X. Repeated note, and it's the same exact rhythm as motive X from the presentation phase, the first basic idea. Okay, we got motive X, and then I put X double prime because it's still got repeated notes, but now the end of it, it's the same rhythm, but now the end of it is down a third. Okay, so it's a different variation from this one. So I'm putting X double prime for this. Okay, so this is the part that we call fragmentation. So now we've taken that first idea from the presentation phase and we've fragmented out the motives. Okay, so now we've just got X motive and then X motive. So, and we got one group and then a one measure group and another one measure group. And we call that the fragmentation. And then let's look at the end, the last two measures. This is what we call liquidation. Look, now the motive, there's neither motive X nor Y. Okay, it's completely generic. The motive has been liquidated and we're leading into the cadence. This is a cadential formula. Another feature of this that is, again, it's just so sophisticated for a song called Great Balls of Fire, is that the liquidation part of the continuation phase starts on the beat. It says, goodness gracious, starts on the beat. Every other time we've had an idea, it's been presented off of on an upbeat. Okay, the downbeat has an eighth rest and we've got an upbeat every single time. And now when we get to the liquidation, that characteristic feature of motive X is completely gone. So is the repeated fast notes. Right now we've got quarter notes going. And we get this really great octave leap that's way outside of the range of a male voice. And then back down, and we end on the do for the what I called a kind of a blues rock PAC, if you will. All right, let's give this a listen. So let me just remind you of some more definitions of sentence features. The basic idea, okay, consists of the motives that define the sentence. Fragmentation, it takes the motives from the basic idea and separates them out into one measure units. And then liquidation is the end of the sentence when you eliminate all of the characteristic motives and you get this stream of generic notes that heads into a cadence. Let's take a look at one more example of a sentence. This one is from the classical repertoire. This is a theme from the Piano Sonata by Beethoven, Opus 2, number 3. All right, let's do the same. Let's go through the same process. I've got my 2-measure opening idea, another 2-measure opening idea, and you can see that it's based off of the same motives. So I've got my X motive, which is the first measure. Okay, you've got a half note of a third, and then continuing with 16th notes, the third, and then we lead to staccato 8th notes. And then these 2 quarter note strikes I'm calling motive Y. Same thing happens in the second part of the second idea. Motive X is still there, but now instead of on C and E, it starts on D and F. Okay, so now we're on a 5/7 harmony. And then motive Y is the same 2 quarter note strikes. So it's the same motive, however, it's presented with different harmonies. The first one goes from 1 to 5, and the second one does the opposite of that. It goes from 5/7 in this case because of the F to 1. All right, now let's take a look at the continuation phase. I got 1 bar and 1 bar. The first bar of the continuation is motive X, right? And we recognize it. However, I should have put X prime here. Why? Because instead of a third, we have a 6th. Okay, so Beethoven, sneaky Beethoven, has inverted the opening interval. Okay, but it's still recognizably X, right? Because a third inverts to a 6th, so it sounds so similar, and the rhythm is exactly the same. Okay, still leads to the same thing. Now check this out. This is also sophisticated writing. Beethoven takes motive X and even completes it, right? Because you got these 2 quarter note strikes, which was pretty much the same ones from before, motive Y. However, that's overlapped with another presentation of X. Okay, so this is a really cool little detail. All of these sentences have these cool little motivic variations in them. Okay, they're all very, very beautiful pieces of music. I only show you guys the good stuff. All right, now let's take a look at the liquidation phase. Okay, we've made it to our IAC, so we've got a 5/1 motion, root position 5 to a root position tonic in C major, and it doesn't cadence in the soprano on scale degree 1. It cadences on scale degree 3. That's why I called it an IAC, incomplete authentic cadence. All right, so there is your fragmentation again, and there's your liquidation. All right, let's give this one a listen. So to sum up today's lesson, a sentence is a type of theme, and it can constitute an entire A section of a piece, whether it's a sonata like we saw Beethoven, or if it's the first A section of a 32-bar rock song or a musical. Okay, the sentence is a type of a theme. It consists of a presentation phase in which you have a 2-measure basic idea and another 2-measure basic idea. And those basic ideas are defined by their characteristic motives. And then we have the continuation phase, which fragments those motives from 2-measure ideas into 1-measure ideas. Okay, with only one of those motives, right? Usually in these basic ideas, you have 2 motives. You take one of those motives out and you stick it in the fragmentation part. And then the liquidation. So now any remnant of the motive is now gone as we lead into the cadence. And this is the part of the whole thing that makes it exciting, because it develops. This is what we call musical development. You develop the motives in a basic idea. All right, so that's lecture number 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. and I'll see you on Friday for Lecture 3.